to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch by interviewing authors, discussing their books, learning about the writing process, and even, on occasion, chatting live with a panel of authors to discuss topics relevant to both readers and writers. My guest today on the Online for Authors podcast is Karin Ciholas, author of the book The Lighthouse. Karin was born in Virginia and grew up in Switzerland, where she studied classical languages. The study of Latin and Greek led to her fascination with the ancient world and its history. In my book review, I stated that ancient history is not really my thing. However, once I started reading, I couldn't stop thinking about the characters, even when I was supposed to be doing other things. In fact, I read far late into the night on a couple of occasions so I could finish. And the best part is that Karin is writing a trilogy, so I'm not really done. The Lighthouse is set during the days of Christ and seen from the point of view of Simon, an educated Jewish healer, and his best friend from boyhood, who eventually becomes a Roman soldier. When a thug kills a member of Simon's family and then abducts his sister, he is chosen to avenge them. But how can he both murder the one who abducts his sister and keep his Hippocratic oath? Karin did a great job describing Simon's struggle to be everything he was meant to be, as well as everything he has been asked to be. Despite a setting and time far removed from my own, I think all readers will understand that challenge. As a research junkie, I stand in awe of Karin's tremendous research and how she was able to bring me into Simon's world. She shows readers what it's like to be Jewish during Roman rule, whether focusing on family and religious traditions or the fear of those in power. This is an excellent read, and I highly recommend it to anyone who loves great character development, historical fiction, and escaping into a story. Welcome today to Online for Authors. We have author Karin Ciholas, who has written The Lighthouse. Welcome, Karin.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I love talking about it.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you. This was a wonderful historical fiction, but before we get into it, I want you to give everyone a quick little elevator speech as to what this book is about.
This book is about a Jewish physician who lived 2,000 years ago, and he was so excited about healing that he spent all his time and passion on that until, because of other violence in his city of Cyrene, his sister was abducted. And so he went all over the place to find his sister. And in the process, he went to Alexandria, the best university in ancient times, and studied medicine. And you will have to read the novel to know whether he finds his sister.
Right. I loved the story idea, especially because, he wants to be a healer. That's what he believes that he is driven to do, right? And then on the other hand, his sister is abducted. And as the oldest in his family, or because he was the brother, he was essentially tasked to not only find her, but revenge, which was right, completely opposite of what he was supposed to do.
Right. He believed in the sanctity of life,
right,
and saving lives. And here the Jewish community, which had a senate in their little town of Cyrene, tasked him with the job as a goal to find revenge. And so he does set out first to find her, and he goes through all the slave markets and is totally demoralized by what he sees.
Right.
And then later he gets to Jerusalem looking for her at the very time of the crucifixion.
Right. And that was the other thing that I found very interesting, was like the time period and the setting. What What drew you to this time period?
Well, since I was 12 years old, I think I've been living in ancient times. I fell in, that's crazy. So I guess I'm about 2,000 years old. Sometimes I feel that way. But basically, I loved Latin, which is weird, I know. And then when I was 14, I started Greek, and everything about the ancient world fascinated me. And I read way beyond what I was supposed to in school. I was more interested in the history than the
Right.
language. So I did all that. And I've always wanted to use that to read the primary sources, to read the philosopher Philo, or to read Josephus, who wrote in Greek, not in Hebrew. He was
Right.
Jewish. So I was able to read all of those works, and there's so much, there's so many jewels in all that history that most people know nothing about. That I was able to put some of that, of course, not all, but some of that into the novel.
Well, that's something that I noticed is that obviously you did an enormous amount of research, but not in a way that bogged the reader down. I felt like everything that I learned while going along in your novel flowed really well. It was meant to be there. It helped move the story forward. I have read a few that I don't know, like you're reading along and then you feel like you're stop, let's have a history lesson. Okay, now we're going to read the story. Stop, let's have a history lesson. And that isn't the way your book went. I felt very much like I was learning, but almost accidentally learning and just going along with the story. I loved it. You did an amazing job.
Well,
Absolutely amazing job.
I love that you saw that. I don't like novels that go into long descriptions or
Right.
lectures. And that is a temptation since I am a retired teacher. You tend to want to teach, but you can teach through character. And
Yes.
that's what I tried to do. And what I wanted the reader to feel is the emotions of the character. And yes, you have to have the context, but the context is only the context for the emotions. You've got to have how passionate he is. And you
Right.
have to have his love story where he actually falls in love with a Roman girl, which, oh, that's going to be quite a challenge there.
Right.
So all of that. And what is she? She's the daughter of a senator, no less. And so this is something where I invented some, but I never intentionally swayed away or abandoned the historical accuracy I found.
Right.
I didn't change a date. I didn't change, I invented some names, but Simon is listed in the Gospel of Mark as having two sons, and they are named Alexander and Rufus. That was my clue that he married a Roman girl, because Rufus is definitely not a Jewish name.
Right, right. And so I also, what I loved was that you were showing this story from this Jewish want to be doctor, Jewish healer's point of view, but we also get to see it from the Roman angle as well, because he has a best friend who's Roman. He has a wife who's Roman. He's living in this Roman community, and we get to see both sides, which is another thing that I really enjoy when I read a historical fiction, that you don't get focused on one angle only and you don't get to see like the whole picture. And I feel like because of the characters that you put in there, we at least got to see a couple of different angles of what's happening at this period of time and from those different points of view.
Well, I sort of focused on 3 points of view. The Roman point of view is definitely there with
Right,
the Roman family. And then the Jewish point of view is very dominant.
right,
And then the third is a little less clear, but is the Egyptian.
Yeah.
Egypt was amazing. It was a civilization 3,000 years long before Christ. There was so much medicine being practiced. I've read books on ancient Egyptian medicine, and it's fascinating because they understood the body because of embalming, and that was the focus of teaching medicine in
Right.
Alexandria.
Right. And it was a very different focus. In fact, once the library was destroyed,
We
lots
lost
was
so much.
lost. Right.
We
And so
lost.
that's kind of when we went through those dark ages, right? Where like medicine went backward.
It went very backward. In fact, even Simon that's preempting a little bit on the second and third book, but
Okay.
he, as an older man, he's very frustrated that so many of the people at the museum are going backwards, and instead of doing medicine or calling on some kind of magical formula from the gods.
Right.
And he is trying to change that.
Okay. So I love that. So let's just jump forward then and talk about the fact that this is the first in a trilogy, right?
That's correct. The second book is on the way soon. I hope this spring.
Awesome.
And it was actually the hardest to write, I think, because it has to pick up where I left off and have enough, assume that people may not have read the first book, that you have enough information about the character anyway,
Right.
but not overdo that. And then it has to connect with the last part.
Right.
So, but the tension in the second book is mostly Simon's friend, the Roman, and the villain is no longer a made up villain, but a very real villain, and that is the Emperor Caligula. And we all know a little about him. And we don't really want to know more.
Right. Right. So that book you're hoping, does it have a name, your second one?
It does. It's called The Bronze Door.
The Bronze Door. And then we have a third one, right? This is going to be a trilogy. Do you have any inkling where you're going with number 3?
Yes, because I really try to have Simon as a witness to 40 years that changed the world. More or less starts at the crucifixion and ends at the fall of the temple in the Roman-Jewish War.
Okay. So you kind of know where it's going.
Yes, and he's still a physician then.
Mm-hmm.
But what does the Roman army ask of him? They ask of him to help in Jerusalem to heal the wounds of the soldiers that are getting wounded in that war on the Roman side.
Right.
Which, of course, breaks his heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can imagine.
So tell me, why Simon? Like, why this character? How did, with all the research that you've done and all of your love for this period of time, what prompted you to come up with a Jewish man who wants to heal? Where did that come from?
Well, it did start with the Bible, with the New Testament, because I was just so curious about Simon. Here he is in Jerusalem. He doesn't really appear anywhere else in our history, except that his sons are known, which leads me to think that because of his sons, he became famous retroactively.
Okay.
But does that make it clear?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's clear. So I see him as a fascinating person because he really didn't want to do this. He was forced by a Roman soldier. But because I see him as a physician, he wants to save this poor man who falls down under the weight of the cross.
Right.
And of course, you can see his whole life as being symbolic, but I don't portray it that way. I see him as, even at the crucifixion, he really was trying to see if he could save Jesus.
Right.
And of course, there's no way. The mob is against them. But he is very, very baffled by it and very upset because he wants to save lives.
Right. He doesn't understand the idea of wanting to kill anyone. And so,
he cannot,
right.
and so yet he's torn between his Hippocratic oath that he swears with all
right,
a solemn oath for him, and then between that and his duty toward his family's tradition about revenge, which
right,
is biblical also.
Right. So it has kind of a basis in the Bible. So you've found characters, right?
Yes. I come from a family of theologians.
Okay. Okay. All right. And so I'm curious, how long has this character been sitting in your head? Like, at what point did you decide that Simon is a physician and that you have to write about him?
It was so long ago that I'm embarrassed to say how long it took for me to do this. I had a full-time job, as most writers do when they set out. I wrote a lot of short stories and plays, but this was sort of always in the back of my mind. Simon deserves a story.
Yeah.
And actually, it's my mother, bless her heart. She was a widow by then. And she told me, she said, there's Ben-Hur, and there's The Robe, and there's all of those. And then there's the novels about Peter, but nobody does anything with Simon. And she knew I wrote short stories. Uh-huh. So I said, well, I will try to remedy that. And in order to keep her, she was already getting fairly old, and I was afraid that she said she wanted more interesting things to read. I would send it to her chapter by chapter in the mail.
Oh, how fun.
That was how it started. And then she kept saying, it was sort of like, 1,001 Nights. I couldn't stop because she might die.
Right. You had to keep writing until the next thing you know, you have a novel.
That was sort of what motivated it then.
Yeah.
And so I was furiously doing research. And of course, since then, it has changed a lot. And I think that I'm learning a lot more about how to write. And that's a process.
It is a process. As a reader, you think, oh, well, you just sit down and you write this book, and it isn't the way it works, is it?
No, not at all.
And even if you have a great idea and you know where you want to go with it, and you start putting it down on paper, there's still so much more to it. There's.
Oh, that. Yeah. I see that you have a third book out.
I do. I have a third book out now. So yeah, it is exciting, but still that process of, the storyline is only one little aspect of it. And then it isn't even just the storyline, that's the plot. But like, how are you going to get that out? Where are you going to start? Are you going to do any flashbacks? Why? Why are you doing a flashback for this one? Are you going to do any flash forwards? Are you going to switch point of view? Are you going to, and all of those things come into play. Yeah, it's not, and then there's just I tell people, it's like, you don't go out and play a great game of tennis the first time that you ever pick up a racket. And it's the very same thing with writing.
Exactly.
You write your first chapter, and although you feel really good about it, give it a year and go back and look at it, and you'll think, wow, I really need to do some work, because you've learned from all the writing in the meantime.
I think I learned a lot writing short stories.
I'm sure.
And I've published a lot of them, most of them, in various literary journals. And I learned a lot from that. And I also learned writing plays because I do like dialogue in a novel.
Yes.
I think it helps portray the character in such a good way. And it also lightens up heavy text, if you know what I
Well, and
mean.
I think dialogue
Visually.
can, yes, and dialogue too can help bring in parts of the history that you don't know how to do in text, because you can have someone have a conversation and you can bring in names and things that are happening, and hey, did you read about what's going on today in the blue, and it becomes alive instead of just
Absolutely. I'm
this
so
this
with you on
side
that.
piece. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's exciting to bring characters alive that, I mean, I feel like I believe in them. I feel like Simon really did this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's funny because Balzac, the French writer, when he was on his deathbed, called for the doctor that was in his novel. I love that story
So do
because
I.
to us, right, the characters are alive to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
I feel with them. I cry with them. I want to shake Simon and tell him, no, 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 it's too dangerous what you're trying to do.
Or
And of course he
sometimes,
doesn't listen.
no, I know, but does your character just do what it's going to do? I have characters that sometimes sit up against the desk and cross their arms and they say, no, that's not what we're doing. We're doing it my way or no way. And, you end up having to just, go along with them, even though you're saying, why are you doing this?
Except sometimes that's gotten me into trouble, because if you get him into trouble and I can't get him out, there's not a second book.
Right. You have to figure out what to do. Yeah, it's I love that Simon lives in your head. So I'm curious, when book 3 is done, you've put Simon away. Do you
Oh
have
dear.
any yeah, I know it's a little scary, isn't it? Do you have anything else down the road? Do you have other ideas that are kind of percolating back in there?
Well, yes. I wrote a play on an Austrian man who refused to serve in the army of Hitler, and he really lived. I did the research, but I think it would make a better novel than play. So I'm thinking of using that material, but I really want to finish this first.
Right. I I often have other ideas and then I write them down, just like the idea, or maybe a brief little something. And then I put it in a folder that I have that's called ideas. And then
Good.
when I'm done with what I'm doing, then I look those over and I kind of like, I don't know, I just kind of sit with them for a while and see which one is the one that's jumping out at me. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I do know, because that particular story won't leave my mind, even though I'm working on other things. And I actually have to say, I'm not doing it right now. Not right now. Just stop. Not now. We'll get to you.
Well, was it that way with your new book, with all the healing that's involved, and the
Yeah. So
because you're looking at all these different herbs and medicinal things, and you just had to deal with that, right?
right.
And
It's,
3 women again.
yeah, it's
Well,
crazy.
I haven't read it because I don't think it's out yet. Is it?
It is out just now.
Just
It's
now.
just now out. Yeah.
And,
So
and and remind me of your title.
yeah, it's called Daughters of Green Mountain Gap.
It sounds like Kentucky.
So it's actually, believe it or not, it's the mountains of North Carolina. So you're not
North
far.
Carolina.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the
But
Appalachian Mountains.
it sounds, well, they, of course,
Yes, they do.
are adjacent.
They
So,
are. So yeah, very, very good guess. That means I did a good job with my title.
oh, you
Yes.
did. I love the cover
Oh,
and the
thank you.
gap.
Thank you.
The gap. Don't you love it?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I definitely love it. So back to Simon. We're going to talk about his medical training, right? Was there anything that you learned while doing this research that you found really fascinating in terms of like medical advancements?
Well, I was surprised that because of embalming in Egypt, he really became the master surgeon, which means that he could sew up wounds that before were simply clamped.
Mm-hmm.
And they had all kinds of stitches for embalming that he more or less, I think he was somewhat of a pioneer at the time, but other doctors were also, and that's why I dared show that they pioneered surgery in a way that it had not been done, because they had the stitching, and using silk thread was an issue, and this kind of thing. I thought that
Right.
was fascinating. Also, his father traveled a lot and therefore was not there when his sister was abducted. And Simon is very young at the time and feels responsible because he's the man of the house
Right.
when
Right.
and the father travels all the way to the east, almost to India, not as far as India, but as quite far. So he gets to the point of getting all of these wonderful herbs and spices that Simon played with when he was a child and learned different ways to heal.
To
And
use
of
them.
course,
Mm-hmm.
and he used them. And I read wonderful books about herbs and spices and how they were used, some from the Far East. One that was supposedly helpful for leprosy that he tried out in book 2, I think, or book
Yeah.
3.
They're starting to run together now, aren't they?
Well, he's always, but the book 2 is about more about the main character is Simon's best friend
Right.
Valerius,
Yeah.
but he's what I would call a noble Roman,
Awesome.
and he grew up being with best friends with Simon, and has a sensitivity to the Jews that very few Romans had.
Right. Right. Because of that connection.
And he is historical.
Right.
There are 2 sources on him, both Philo and Josephus. And amazingly enough, they tell the story of his conflict with Caligula, and there's no differences between the 2 stories.
Oh
There's an
wow.
emphasis. Philo, the Jewish philosopher and theologian, he emphasized in the story, he emphasized God's providence, whereas Josephus is much more the matter-of-fact historian. He doesn't
Mm-hmm.
talk about God having come in and saved the situation. He talks just about the facts.
Right.
Just the facts, ma'am.
That's true.
And so it was fascinating to read both accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Both are in Greek. Philo wrote in Greek, and Josephus, the Jewish historian, wrote in Greek. That was the language of Alexandria. And it was also the language that was used more than Latin in the Roman Empire, because of Alexander the Great. Greek had spread far and wide. Fascinating stuff,
Yeah, I didn't
actually.
know. I mean, it really is. I love the fact that you were able to go to the sources and then read them in that language. I think that, I mean, the difference here is for instance, if I were going to read anything that Josephus had to write down, I'd have to read a translated version into English because I would never be able to read what.
Well, I cheat. I
Do you
mean, I'll
cheat?
be
Okay.
honest. I read both the Greek,
Right.
but the Loeb Classical Library is Greek on one side, English on the other. So you have because there's a lot of vocabulary that that you can forget,
Yes.
and so I don't want people to think that I just read Greek as though I read English. That's not at all
Okay.
true. but I can go back to the source and actually quote Philo in one place. And in one place he has such an interesting statement that's, I think, is so modern. He says, "For God, time does not exist. God is eternity." I love that. And it
Yeah,
sounds modern. It sounds like modern day astronomers who are discovering the wonders of the universe.
right,
To me,
right.
that's what it sounds like.
Oh,
God is eternity.
I
I
love
have that
that.
quote in my second book.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. And is your second book being put out by Atmosphere Press like your first one?
Yes,
Yeah.
because I have found them very congenial and helpful to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. I use them as
I,
well. I really like them as a publisher.
they are willing to, well, we don't always agree on a particular thing, in terms of the editing, but we find common ground, and I know the
Yeah.
book is 10 times better because of them.
Yeah, that's the way I feel, that I don't always
And
agree, but
I
I
know some
always listen.
people
Yeah.
I know some people may not feel that way, but I have learned so much about the process from them.
Right.
And I I actually have a PhD in comparative literature from the University of North Carolina, but I did not know how to do a book until they helped me do a
Right.
book.
There's a difference between like understanding literature and then actually
Oh,
making
yes,
it into a book and putting it down. So you went to UNC Chapel Hill?
I did.
Fantastic. I'm from North Carolina. Well, I've lived in
Yes.
North Carolina since 1979, so I feel like I'm from North Carolina.
Well,
And
I
two of
taught.
my two of
I
my girls graduated from UNC. So,
well, delightful. I love
yeah.
UNC. I loved my professors there. I had wonderful professors. Dr. Eugene Falk was amazing, but I just think that it's an excellent, excellent school. And
Yep.
of course, Duke is nearby, which is
Yes, it
also
is.
excellent. But I taught my first year after my PhD, I taught at Chapel Hill for a year, the Great
Fantastic.
Book series. And after that, I taught, you probably have heard of it because my husband taught there. He taught religion at Campbell
I
University.
know where Campbell is. I sure do.
Yes, Buies Creek, North Carolina.
Yes, little tiny in the middle of nowhere.
And it had one of the best religion departments, I think, in the South. Really wonderful people.
Yes, I love it. And they now have a law school, and I believe they've put the law school in Raleigh. So
I didn't know
it's not in
that.
Buies Creek. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
But they also had a medical school, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. So it's grown
That's
considerably.
that's
When it
all.
first started, it was little tiny.
Oh, I know. I remember Papa Campbell, who was then president. Well, he had retired by the time I was there, but he was sort of the father of the whole
Of the
college.
whole thing. Right. All right. So you hope book number 2, The Bronze Door, is coming out maybe this spring.
I
And
hope so.
book number 3, do we have a name for book 3?
Well, my name is Beyond the Horizon.
Okay. Awesome. And
It's not a.
any idea when you think it's coming out?
I don't know. It always takes longer than I think.
Yeah, that's
But I don't want to. I don't want to risk not being able to finish it.
so sooner rather than later is when we're going to expect that
I
one,
hope.
right?
I hope. I think because I've learned so much in the first one that I can probably do better. Do it a little quicker.
Right.
But I'm not sure because it has to be right before it gets published.
I
mean,
understand. I understand.
I keep trying to make it so that you want to know what the next page says.
Well, you did that for me with the Lighthouse. I can honestly say that it is not a time period that usually interests me. So unlike you, that era just is like, it's okay. I don't know. And I think it's because I've probably always only learned about that era through boring lectures, and lectures can get really, really dry. Um, and so I don't know, but I read it. I think if I remember correctly, I won that book. Like
Oh, good for you.
I did through Atmosphere Press, and that was the book that I won, and I thought, okay, well, that's great. I'll read it. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll read it. And then I finally said, okay, Terry, you're going to sit down and read this book. And I did. And I wasn't, but maybe 4 or 5 pages in, and I knew I'd finish it. Like I had to know what was going on. And it kept me feeling that way through the entire book. And at the end, I reevaluated and said, well, maybe I do like this time period. Maybe it's just been what I've been,
It's not all Ben-Hur, right?
Yeah.
Well, although Ben-Hur is a great book.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong. It's just that, well, when I talked with my mother, she said, well, there are other characters in the Bible who never get any attention.
Right. Right. So I really, it was an excellent book. I have definitely told many people, if they say to me, hey, do you have a good idea for historical fiction? I've told a lot of people, you've got to look at the Lighthouse. You have got to look at the Lighthouse. So.
And the Lighthouse itself is such an interesting thing. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a technical marvel. And it stood for 2,000 years. It was the tallest building in the world for 2,000 years.
Isn't that
and then
crazy?
It was toppled by an earthquake in the 14th century. So it's an amazing structure.
Yeah.
And they're finding pieces of it down in the ocean, down in the Mediterranean, I should say.
Isn't that cool? Yeah. So, and I really love the fact that you are a lot like me in terms of the history that goes in has to be real. I can have made up characters. I can have people that didn't really exist, but the history that they're living in has to be real. And I try my best. Now I'm not perfect, and I'm not a historian, and I may have made mistakes, but they're not purposeful. I always do my best to keep things as accurate as I can. Well, and I felt that in yours as well.
Well, bravo to you, because that's one of my pet peeves about historical fiction, when the author at the end says, oh, I changed this date and that person has a different name and I did something else because of my story. I said, no, I don't want that.
Right. I read one book. I'm not going to say which one. It was a good book. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I was very disappointed because at the end I found out that what I thought was this beautiful love story, that ending wasn't real. And there was a known ending. There was a known ending, and they did something else, and that it'd be different if there was an unknown, and then you created an ending in order to make things. But if there's a known ending, then you have to, in my opinion, this is my opinion, if you're going to write historical fiction, the historical part is the real part, and you have to stay true to it. The fiction part is what your fictional characters do, or what your non-fictional character does that you don't know, that you can't know. You can't know their thought at any time unless they wrote it down in a journal, or you can't know that, they went out on a date with someone. You might not know these facts, and so you can bring them in. But if you know that in the end, these two people did not get together, then I just don't think you should put them together. Maybe I'm wrong.
I agree with you, but it, that's why there is some advantage to choosing a character who is not as well known. You can invent more about them.
Right.
But everything has to fit to the time period.
I agree. I agree. All right, Karin, where can people get a hold of you if they are just dying to know more about the Lighthouse or want to ask you a question or just reach out? How do they do that?
Well, they can reach me at Karin@Ciholas.com. They do have to, that's an email address. They have to spell my name correctly. I spell Karin with an I. My father was Norwegian, and so that's the Norwegian Catherine. And Ciholas is really, my husband is responsible for that one. And it has to be spelled, but if you have to spell it right to buy the book at Amazon or at any bookstore, you have to know the last name because I didn't use a pen name.
That's all right. I will have all of that in the show notes so that people will be able to go and click right onto your website. And I want to thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, thank you for reading my book and for enjoying it. I appreciate that. And I will look forward to your next one. Well, this one, actually, I should say, since it's already out.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.